But first, before I get to the obvious, and there is a lot to get to tonight, Airbus Albo, still back up in the air, and of course on an international trip last week, an international trip this week, an international trip next week, potentially one after that, and forever until, of course, we all agree he's the single greatest leader in the history of Australia. But this time, as he is flying around the world, he is taking the credit card with him. He loves spending other people's money, and despite the fact that this country is $1 trillion in debt, he's got plenty of money to chuck about, including today in Papua New Guinea. Now, firstly, the Australian taxpayer is going to help fund a brand new rugby league team, part of soft diplomacy, but that's $600 million. But what about this? Today, on the 50th anniversary of Papua New Guinea having independence from little old Australia, the Australian Prime Minister has rolled up and said that we are going to build an extension onto the Papua New Guinean Parliament, we being you and me, the Australian taxpayer.
What they want is a ministerial wing as well, so that you can have government services right here where Parliament is. There are challenges in a country like this. Australia will continue to provide support, and one really tangible way of celebrating the 50th anniversary is for Australia to assist with building the democracy, literally the building that will help to house the democracy.
Now, I get all of this is about a soft play about saying that for every dollar we spend, it's a dollar that China doesn't spend. But of course, China always finds a way to end up spending $2 for every one of our dollars. So I understand the logic behind this, but here we are. To celebrate the 50th year of independence, Australia is still paying for the infrastructure of Papua New Guinea. We are paying for the extension to their federal parliament. Now, I'd love to be able to tell you a number of how much this is going to cost. Remember, our parliament, built in the 1980s, cost $1 billion. An extension to the parliament in Papua New Guinea could cost, well, not as much as that, but still an awful lot of money. But when the relevant minister was asked today by Sky News on our air, how much is this going to cost? This was the answer. Remember, you're paying to rebuild or extend the PNG Parliament.
A generous gift, though, given it's a blank cheque, essentially.
Well, it's not a blank cheque. We have a good idea of the cost, but we're not going to give it a definitive idea until we've done the detailed design work. Importantly, it's coming out of the existing development relationship with PNG. It's not additional money. It's part of our annual funding of development in Papua New Guinea. So
are we talking hundreds of millions? Is that the figure?
I'm not going to put a sum on. I don't think it's going to be in that plural there, but we'll see what the detailed design is. But I want to assure your viewers that this is a great, important, symbolic gift to PNG, but it will come out of existing development funding.
Yeah, I mean, Australia, not hundreds, maybe hundred. What's $100 million? On borrowed money, because our federal budget is in deficit this year, next year and every year, according to Treasury, till the 2060s. We're $1 trillion in debt. Well, we've slowly become 1.5, 2 and 3, but whatever. Tomorrow's problem. And remember, it's so important that we deal with tomorrow's problems when it comes to climate, but not tomorrow's problems when it comes to the budget deficit. Don't pay attention to the details, just nod, pay your taxes and shut up, right? Now, this $100 million is on top of another announcement which was made by the Prime Minister in his Airbus Albo mode, spending other people's money, racking up the money that we don't already have. How much did he give at a Pacific Islands forum last week?
We will affirm our commitment to be backing in the Pacific-led solutions to climate change impacts, and we will contribute an initial $100 million.
Oh, wow. And I get it. $100 million goes a long way in the Pacific Islands. And yes, the importance of the soft power pushback against... I get all of this. But even polls post-election tell us that the number one issue apparently for people still remains cost of living. And in this country, there's just one issue that I would love them to spend $100 million on, and that is people being able to eat. The Australian federal government does not give $100 million to Food Bank. It does not give $100 million to the charities who help feed the poor. Let alone, of course, the working poor who know it costs more than it did a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago to go and do basic shopping. And it's not normal, the increases when it comes to our power bills. But you'll love this today. The Reserve Bank is now singing from the same song sheet as the government. Why? Because, of course, the government helped rig the way the Reserve Bank works from now on. Remember, reconstituting the board, all the rest of it. Apparently, the fight against inflation is almost over. Now, this comes into that central thing, which is the great difference between the numbers that come out of Canberra and the reality of your life. Here's the truth. That, yes, monthly inflation, month to month, slightly smaller increases than the major increases that were there a few years ago. Year to year, slightly smaller increases on what they were a couple of years ago that were bigger. But if you go back and have a look at where we were living, way back in those black and white TV days of 2022, you know, all the way back to the year after the Tokyo Olympics, everything's way up. Hugely up. But now, just the way it is. Suck it and see. Sorry, guys. We've done everything we possibly can. No pressure to put the prices back down, just to limit the amount that they constantly go up. But there's $100 million for us to extend the Parliament of Papua New Guinea. Food Bank, you've got to jump through way more hoops than they have to in Papua New Guinea so we can look like the big boys or feel like the big boys in the region. Now, I want to talk about Andrew Hastie because pretty obviously he is, in gambling terms, starting to go all in. He has already stood in the Parliament and said he does not want the coalition to remain where it currently is, which is backing net zero by 2050. You know that, but to remind you, this is what he said.
Tonight I'm calling out the moral hypocrisy of the net zero zealots, and I do this on behalf of regular Australians who are the ones bearing the cost of Labor's reckless climate and energy policy.
He has also said, as you know, in the past 24 hours in an interview on ABC Radio in Perth, that there is a massive shot that if that remains the policy, he's not going to be able to stand by the leader. He will join others like Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, Matt Canavan, Barnaby Joyce on the backbench. You've heard it before, but let me play it to you one more time.
If Susan Lee, though, supports net zero by 2050, where does that leave you?
That leaves me without a job. I've nailed my colours to the mast, Gary. Like, if I go out with a tide in 2.5 years, that's great. My primary mission in politics is to build a stronger, more secure, more competitive Australia. Energy security is a vital input to that.
We'll see what happens in the next couple of days, but at least this colleague was willing to go out. He was the former environment spokesperson under Peter Dutton just before the last election.
Look, if we just said net zero at any cost by 2050, I think you'd find there'd be a mass exodus. The reality is that most of the members of our front bench and indeed most of the members of our party room are interested in making sure that whatever we do, if it is to retain a net zero by 2050, doesn't come at whatever the cost might be, unlimited cost. Net zero at any cost is something that only stupid people would pursue, frankly.
But I just want to say something before we all start running in the same direction. Andrew Hastie is an absolute star. There is no question about it. He's a bloke who at one point in time, whenever he inevitably becomes the leader, he's got a swagger, he's got a look, he's great on TV, all the rest of it. He's going to make quite the impression. But I'm going to be very clear to repeat what I said last night. The coalition can no longer afford to still be talking in the words of climate change doesn't exist, it's all BS, the climate's always been changing, because the extreme majority of the country is not in that place anymore. This is not me saying that I want green policies, all the rest of it, and I understand the horrible consequences of the way Bowen is doing things. But the most trustworthy indice in Australian politics is Newspoll. And today, there was a news poll that should give caution not to everyone who is fighting net zero, but if Andrew Hastie one day ends up being the leader, he is going to have to talk a different talk than those that in the past have said things like climate change doesn't exist. Why? Because have a look at this. Now, I've asked for a long time, can someone somewhere just give us a straight up poll of do you support what's happening now, what should happen in the future, are you pro net zero or not? Let me make this nice and simple. 28% of people believe that the cost of action is too great and Australia should slow down on the current 43% target, okay? So that is where, frankly, the leaders of One Nation, the National Party, and people like Andrew Hastie are starting to argue as about where the coalition should go. That's currently 28%. People who are comfortable with the current number of 43%, well, that is about 25% of people. So again, you don't want that 25% of people to think that abandoning net zero means you're doing nothing, because maybe they'll be able to combine where 25 plus 28 gives you the 50% and you're off to the races. But if people think your position is climate change is crap and we don't need to do anything, that 25% will unite with the 37% who believe that Australia should increase its action on climate change because the cost of not doing more is too great. And that number is into the 60s. So whoever ends up leading a coalition in a position, and I'm saying from Susan Lee through to potential other leaders, whoever ends up in a position, if their position is no to net zero, they cannot say no to the existence of climate change. I'm not saying it because I'm some crazy lefty who's trying to get in under the radar. I'm telling you, if you want to win 76 seats in the parliament, you need more than 50% of the population to agree with you. That's important. The male-female split on the same issue. Just 23% of women believe that the cost is too much. 24% of women say, stick with 43. 40% of women say we need to go higher. Again, what that middle band thinks of what no to net zero means will be the difference between being in the fight or out of the game. Why do I say it? I don't say it because it's pretty, and I'm not saying it because, again, I'm taking a heel turn to the left. But the reality is, if you want to win 76 seats, you need to win 76 seats to get a majority, and that is close to the cities, but more importantly, the suburbs, the outer suburbs, and then the regions. Now, the regions, they are going to be very strong when it comes to the fight against the madness that's come when it comes to things like climate change. But have a look at this. Now, again, don't hate the player, hate the game. There we go. Have a look at this. Because when you actually start to have a look at this by age group, it's really frightening if you think that toss it all, climate change is crap, nothing to see here is going to result in winning an election, no matter of how good your advertising is. Because with 18 to 34-year-olds, 14 plus 24 does not equal 50. 35 and 49, you need to commit the people who are currently happy with everything that's happening, with all of the polls, all of the wires, all of the renewables and all of the climate targets, that you still are on the same page. It gets better the older that you go, but again, we are talking about an electorate that you can cut in 4 directions. You can do it on gender, you can do it on age. You need half of the country to be with you to be able to win an election. And at the end of the day, that has to be what it's all about. Otherwise, Labor will just keep doing what they are doing, and what they are doing is going to hurt. So again, I say, to my friends in the centre-right of politics, I am not abandoning thee. And as a person who believes in free speech and truly believes in it, I believe that even if the numbers of what we believe goes down to 6, 2 or 1%, you have the right to say it. But if the game is about winning an election, how can you win an election from a position where only a third of the country is agreeing with you? And the further you get away from those who disagree with you, the opposition gets tighter and tighter and tighter. That's the question. And as I said last night, there are potential solutions here. I'll get to one of them in a moment or two's time. But that's important too. Liberal philosophy, in many ways, the responsibility or empowering the individual, finding a way to match that to the conversation of, sure, climate change exists and we have to do something about it, but knowing the reality that we're 1% of the world's problem. This is one of those ones where I don't have the answer, and if I did, it's the $1 million answer. But the problem in terms of how many people are open to the discussion, how many people are open to the debate matters, okay? And every single argument is different. Just because it worked on this one doesn't mean it works on that one, and vice versa. Now, to some of the climate nonsense that involved a Labor MP today, I want you to see a Labor MP by the name of Renee Coffey. Now, she is part of the next generation of young progressives who the Labor Party think will hold it into a majority for some period of time to come. Well, she's had to shut down her office. Now, despite the fact that her own government are the ones who put 43% of 1% of the world's problem into law, despite the fact that her government has Chris Bowen pushing us to maybe 75% of cutting 1% of the world's problem or 100% of 1% of the world's problem, she's had to close her office because climate lunatics are going after her as if she is part of a team that is doing nothing. Here's what she had to say and about how some of these people are treating people who are even on their own side.
And I will always stand up for your right to protest peacefully on the issues that matter to you. What I will not tolerate is the treatment of my team that I have seen today outside my electorate office. My team members have been harassed, they have been followed, and they have been aggressively confronted by protesters. And that's just not on.
This is the point. For too long, the climate policy is set by the absolute loons. And by that I don't mean reasonable people in the middle, financial institutions. I mean the people who dozens by dozens go by offices and shake it until they get what they want, effectively involved in sort of an adult temper tantrum. The same people who flood on social media, who fill up the listenership of Radio National, etc., etc. Well, by the way, would there be perhaps part of an indication about why people are even turning on supposed friends in the climate fight when the media is as responsible as this? What about the image that was connected to the Bowen report yesterday, this one in the Channel 9 newspapers? I'm not entirely sure how Antarctica is going to go on fire, and apparently the heat will come from the South Pole, but like Mad Max, that's the expectation. What about over in The Guardian? Oh, that's right, everything's going to burn down. This, of course, is hyperbolic garbage. It ain't true. They will say that it is a metaphor. But for 3/4 of people who, according to some studies, just read headlines only, can't be bothered to go any deeper into anything, they see this sort of stuff as the picture. Now, of course, they make it, via that photo, look like bushfires have only been invented by bad white people or have only been getting worse since the bad white people have been part of the Industrial Revolution or coming to Australia. Of course, bushfires, long part of Australia. Why? Because of histories such as this, with the University of New South Wales saying, a dive into the deep past reveals Indigenous burning helped suppress bushfires 10,000 years ago. So The Guardian may want to make it seem like bushfires were only invented by climate change and white people a couple of years ago. It's been fought in this country for a long time. But who cares? We are, again, post-logic here. We are dealing with faith, and in the same way that you try to have an argument with anyone who just believes, and in the end, that, give me all the evidence, give me all the books, believes, well, you hit a brick wall. If Australia does 100% of what is being asked of us by the nutters who are even going after Labor MPs, guess what happens to the climate in Australia? Nothing. Why? Because Australia is 1% of the climate problem. And as China continues to pollute at its will, the third world, the United States, India and Russia, 45 minutes of the climate clock is making everything worse, and I'd hate to burst the bubble of the lefties, including Chris Bowen. China's climate, thanks to the winds, end up becoming Australia's climate. Now, there are, as I said, some constructive abilities here for people from the centre-right to be able to argue this issue. I'm not talking about, faux centre-right, Turnbull-esque people. I'm talking about whenever the opposition settles wherever it has to settle on the basic, which is the recognition of things as they are, which is things, you can't have 7 billion people on the planet, multiple industrial revolutions without something happening. What's it called and who measures it and how bad it's going to be, that can be for somebody else. So here's a couple of ideas. And as I said, I don't have the answers, but I've got a couple of ideas. that I hope the coalition think about whenever they land wherever they land. Number one, I agree with the suggestion inside the climate report and in others for some time that Australia needs to have something like a permanent disaster force. Now, we take the piss when we rely upon the SES or the RFS or the CFA, whatever they are in your state, to be people who at a moment's notice will have to fight a fire, deal with a flood, help out in drought, 24/7, day after day after day, maybe week after week, wait a few weeks, then go and do another one, do another one, do another one. I like the idea that you don't just use the army, you essentially have a disaster army where, God forbid, we pay some of the people who do this rather than the wonderful people who've been doing this as volunteers for too long. Second, there are a lot of homes in Australia which are now uninsurable. They are uninsurable because literally private companies won't give the insurance. Is there a role for a Liberal-led policy on this issue? I don't know. But going into an election where you say, yeah, of course it's real. I don't think it's as bad as Bowen carries on. I also don't think we should bankrupt ourselves like Bowen carries on. I don't think that we should ruin the earth to save the atmosphere. But I do think that while we need to do our bit, there's only so much we can do. And given that the reality is that, yes, there have always been bushfires, floods and droughts, we should have a standing force that we can send automatically to these things, and we don't have to wait for everyone to ask, and we don't have to rely upon volunteers to deal with it. And for the houses that get washed away because they're in the place that's too close to a river, maybe somehow we can come up with a different type of an insurance scheme. That's how you get into this conversation, because it is too easy for Labor to simply say, unless you're on our side, unless you are at the tip of the spear, then you are part of the problem.